You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. It's Voss here from the ChrisVossShow.com, the ChrisVossShow.com. Welcome to the big show, my family and friends. It's another Chris Voss Show. You know, what was it, like 7 days ago, we just broke into our 15th year. 15 years we've been doing this. And gosh darn it, I'm tired. If it wasn't for the powerful Devil's Mountain coffee that I have that has like, 1,450 milligrams of caffeine in it? That's a lot, folks. That's like 14 cups of coffee, basically. If it wasn't for that, I don't know what I'd do. And maybe I don't know what I'll do anyway. I'd just be on a gurney laying here inside some sort of hospital. They'd have to bring the mics in, and I'd just be like doing the show with some sort of, I don't know, one of those iron lungs on. And you just hear me breathe through the thing. And then, of course, I don't know, maybe that might be a good show. I'd have nurses as co-hosts. And, I'd have our nurse Ratchet come in, and she could be like a co-host. She could do the sidekick, and I'd play the straight man, and she could do the jokes or something. I don't know. Was Nurse Ratchet ever hot in the original? What was it? One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Maybe we could be in the same hospital bed, and we can have Jack Nicholson come in because he's kind of at that same age too, and do it. I don't know why we decided to improv the ramble, talking about hospitals and shit, but here we are. There you go. Anyway, guys, we have an amazing gentleman, multi-book author on the show. We're going to be talking about some really cool, fun stuff. He's got a really interesting book. Well, two interesting books that are filled with stories that are going to entertain you, make you think, and, of course, make you want to buy them and give them away for Christmas. It's Christmas coming up, so this is an important time to listen to all the shows, the 2 to 3 a day, the 10 to 15 a week, so that you can figure out what gifts to give away for Christmas. You got to start thinking about this stuff because this is what the smart people do. I always keep an extra pile of books laying around or gifts laying around, whatever I got from the Goodwill, for those people who end up giving me something that I didn't really care about and didn't get them a gift, but they always show up on Christmas Day and go, "Hey, I got you something." You're like, damn it. And so then I'm always like, "Hey, I got you something. I thought exactly of you. And I'm going to pretend like I like you for a day because you gave me something." And then I go get some books. And I'm like, "Here, take 2 copies of this." They're like, "Why'd you get me 2 copies?" I'm like, "I don't know. It's the backup stuff." It beats regifting, folks, because people know when you regift. Don't regift. That's just bad business. And especially if you don't unwrap it and take the you give them a book where the authors said to XYZ, and they're like, "Hey, why does this have a different name in it?" Don't do that. I've seen that movie. Anyway, guys, we're going to get to him in a second. But as always, this is the cue up for the guilt and shaming. Refer the show to your family, friends, and relatives, because then you can spend the holidays with them and you can talk about the show instead of talking about politics or, I don't know, viral videos or whatever the sort of kerfuffle that's going on TikTok these days. Tell them to go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss, YouTube.com/Chris Voss, and TikTok at Chris Voss 1. Today we had an amazing gentleman on the show, and he's the author of the newest book that's come out. Jason Voyevich is on the show with us today. His latest book is called Booze, Babe, and the Little Black Dress. Sounds like Fridays around my house. Anyway, let's recut that so we get the title right, because otherwise people will Google that on Amazon. It's called Booze, Babe, and the Little Black Dress, How Innovators of the Roaring 20s Created the Consumer Revolution. We'll also tease out his prior book that was really popular called Marketer in Chief, How Each President Sold the American Idea. And we'll find out if it ever came to fruition. Maybe we're just still chasing it. Anyway, he is joining us on the show. We're going to be talking about both books, some of his thoughts on marketing, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things I have is we've got to pull up his bio here so that we have it and we can give you the lowdown on his thing. He has a career that spans more than 25 years. He's launched hundreds of new products, everything from medical devices to virtual healthcare systems to non-dairy consumer cheese. What does he have against dairy? To the next generation alternatives, to the dreaded cone of shame for pets. Wait, he invented that? We'll have to find out. To sex aids for cows. Really? Wow. I don't know. That's a whole show right there. He's a graduate of both the University of Wisconsin and the University of Minnesota, and he has completed postgraduate studies at MIT Sloan School of Management. We have a lot of people from MIT on. His formal training has been invaluable, and he credits his true success to growing up in a family of artists, immigrants, and entrepreneurs. They taught him how to carefully observe the world, see patterns before others notice them, and use those insights to create new innovation. Welcome to the show, Jason. How are you?
I'm doing great, Chris. How are you?
There you go. I am doing awesome. Give us your .coms. Where can people find you on the internet, sir?
Yeah, best place to find me is my personal website, jasontvoyevich.com. You'll find information about all my books, the audiobooks, where to buy them, as well as other projects I'm working on right now. You can also search for me on LinkedIn or Amazon. It's one of the very, very, very few benefits of having a unique name like Jason T. Voyevich. I'm pretty easy to find. If you found me, I'm the same one.
There you go. And there'll be a link on the Chris Voss show as well to you and your books. Now we've crossed the thing that we have to flush out just a little bit. At one point you helped market or launch sex aids for cows.
Yeah, that's right. It's not half as odd as you might think. If you're from farm country, you kind of already know this, but you might notice out in the fields, if you're driving through, you're kind of in your car and you're driving around, and all of a sudden you see two cows that you might believe are engaged in amorous activity.
Oh.
And you've seen this. It's called mounting. And anyone from kind of farm country knows what I'm talking about. But you city folks might need a little lesson. There'll be two female cows that will mount each other. I know. Hear me out. What happens during the kind of cow breeding cycles when the cow goes into heat, they call it in estrus. Okay? Other cows sense that, even female cows, male cows. If there's a male cow there, you kind of know what happens. But even a female cow will mount another female cow. So here's the deal. That's the way that you know, like, okay, that cow is in heat. And usually most dairy these days is artificially inseminated. So the artificial inseminator guy will come by with his tools. We'll just leave it at that. He will inseminate the cow. Well, he's got to be able to have a way to know how many times that cow has been mounted, because the number of times a cow has been mounted equals about how ready that cow is to get pregnant. Wow. So what I helped launch was essentially imagine a scratch-off lotto ticket. You kind of have this picture in your mind, right? Imagine putting a sticker on the back of it so it's highly adhesive. You slap that bad boy on the back of the cow. And then when the other cow mounts it, they're kind of rubbing off the scratch-off. And when the scratch-off is ready, bingo, you won the lottery. Go in there with the artificial inseminator, and you know exactly when to inseminate that cow.
There you go.
It's a scratch-off lotto ticket is a sex aid. Do not try this at home, kids. It is unlikely that your spouse will appreciate that, putting a sticker on.
People that are tuning in right now are like, is this an OnlyFans channel?
This could get weird. This could get really weird.
You know, there's some people that, God bless them, have trouble, they're human beings that have trouble, getting pregnant and stuff like that. Maybe this is something you can do, just know when you're in your cycle or whatever.
Yeah, boy, don't try it. Kids, don't try it at home.
Cow mounting. It's Fridays at my house. Anyway, guys, so give us an idea of this new book that you have out called Booze, Babe, and Little Black Dress. What motivated you on to write this book? And you're like, people, damn it, need to know these stories.
Yeah, I was one of those kids, and you this might be you listening. I was one of those kids that liked to take things apart to just figure out how they worked. Sometimes I was able to put them back together again, but different story, different day. I've been in product development my entire career, about 25 years, and it's kind of natural for me to try to figure out what was the first time we started driving cars? When was the first time that we all started living in suburbs? When was the first time we bought certain products in grocery stores? Really important in my line of work to understand why things work the way they work. What made a new product successful? Because most products, 99.9% of all products ever introduced ever, are no longer on the market. So it's really important to understand what the winners were and why they won. So in my line of work, I research these things, I look at them, and I noticed that product after product after product that I came into, like electric razors, toasters, radios, all kinds of things, were all introduced, mass marketed in the 1920s. And I thought, that's interesting. I didn't know that. I wonder, someone must have written a book on this. I must be able to go to Amazon. It's got 300 and some thousand books. Somebody has gone and collected all this information in a nice packet. Maybe there's some chat GPT thing I can get. And I can it'll spit it out at me and I can be done and I can learn all the things I need to learn. It didn't work that way. There was no book on this. And I figured if I didn't write it, it wouldn't get written. And the stories are really cool and they deserve to be told. So I noticed it. I didn't notice no one else had done it. So I thought, why not me? So there you go.
There you go. So are these great sort of lessons from the 1920s of product development or marketing or both?
You know, there are a lot of both. I think the title kind of gives it away a little bit. You know, Booze, Babe, and the Little Black Dress. Booze is obviously about prohibition. Babe is kind of about Babe Ruth. The Little Black Dress is Coco Chanel and kind of the Little Black Dress. It's kind of hints at the structure of the book. It's made into three parts. Booze and prohibition is all about the new products that got launched during that time. You know, automobiles, you know, all the things that came along, unintended consequences of prohibition, frozen food, all of those sorts of things were just at that time. Babe Ruth is all about entertainment and information. So it's not like new products, but it was the first time baseball became popular, the first time road trips became popular, all of those sorts of things. And then the Little Black Dress is really not a lot about products at all. It's about how we chose kind of our identities, because fashion is really all about how we want to present ourselves to the world. So it was about that. It was about how kids became consumers. It was about credit unions. It's about birth control. All of those sort of things are really born of the 1920s. So yeah, it's about products and it's about marketing and how they came in. But really, it's about who we became as Americans in the 1920s. You know, before then, we were kind of mostly citizens, or we were, that in 1920s, we became consumers. We became choice makers. And that was a huge transition in our psychology. So yeah, it's about products and stuff, and the stories are really cool. But what underlines all of it is the big change in our collective psychology.
There you go. That maybe everyone was sober, or maybe they weren't. Wait,
they were not. I can promise you that they were not sober.
When did the prohibition kick in? 29?
Prohibition was essentially throughout the entire 1920s, basically January 1921 through the early 1930s. And prohibition is funny because you think about it in terms of consumer choice, right? That the government, there was no it was a constitutional amendment. There was no ambiguity there. You couldn't drink that, with exceptions. And Americans and consumers said, "Nah, we're gonna risk jail to go get hammered."
Yeah.
So I think of it as a time of, and sometimes my libertarian friends get excited about this, that this is the first time when the government understood its limits. And what it could do and what it could not do. It could not stop you from, grabbing that fifth of scotch. It could not stop you from grabbing a beer. And that's all those unintended consequences, right? The mob and all kinds of crazy stuff happened, because of prohibition. And that's obviously a chapter that kind of features prominently in there. That's booze in there. It's a ton of fun.
There you go. So was it, up until the roaring 20s, they called them, and people were just having good fun, dancing and, all sorts of stuff. Before that, we were kind of in survival mode, maybe, where we were just everyone was just trying to get by and, not die of, stubbing your toe and dying of, some sort of infection. Just simple stuff like that. You're like, oh shit, I got a cut. I'm going to die next week. Damn it. That sort of thing. They started inventing, drugs where you're going to live. I don't know. So is that kind of where that was kind of the peak of that in the 1920s, and why you wrote about it, and why this kind of turns that page is we kind of start getting to a place in American society where, like, hey, we got a couple extra bucks in our pocket. There's that Wall Street, and we can kind of have some fun and let's some extra spending money maybe.
Yeah, it's that was a big part of it for sure. That you had a lot more products out there that you could buy. Before then, there just wasn't as much stuff that you could buy. You had a lot more people moving into the cities. You had people like Henry Ford who figured out mass production, like how to not only just make a lot more stuff, but before Henry Ford, people don't quite understand how important Henry Ford really was. They're like, oh, he kind of mass produced the Model T. That's not exactly what he did, because people have been mass producing things for 30 to 40 years before then. What Henry Ford figured out is that if you saved money on making a lot more things more efficiently, that you should pass along those savings to people who are going to buy them. I know, crazy thoughts.
Crazy.
That you should think about doing that. And then, even crazier, get this, he said, you know what? I want to pay my workers more so that they can afford to buy my car that I've made cheaper. Model T, by the way, got cheaper every year it was produced. Most people don't know that. Got cheaper each year it came out. The price was lower than it was before. Think about that. Wow. So he figured out, and everybody copied him. So anyone who wanted to release a product kind of had to copy the good model. So you had a lot more things in the 1920s that got cheaper and got more available. That was number one. Number two, you already alluded to it. There's just a lot more money around. Before the 1920s, you didn't have financial infrastructure in the United States. People thought, well, we've got banks, but banks were a mess. This was the first time where you got companies like the General Motors Acceptance Corporation, GMAC, which some of your listeners might have had a loan through. They were founded in the 1920s basically to do installment loans for things like cars. So now, you had all kinds of stuff. You could afford the stuff, and you had to know about the stuff, right? If you didn't know about it, it doesn't matter. If there's a lot of stuff and you can afford it, it doesn't matter if you don't know about it. It's all mass marketing, and all advertising kind of came into its own in the 1920s because during World War I, President Wilson created this Committee on Public Information. Its whole job was to sell war bonds, and figured out how to use mass marketing to do that, trained up a whole bunch of guys. And once they left, the War Department and the war was over, they didn't have nothing to do. And all of those companies like Henry Ford, General Motors, General Electric, all of them said, we need those guys to work for us. And they hired them all, and the advertising agencies hired them all. And it created this kind of perfect storm. You had a lot more stuff. You could afford the stuff, and you knew about the stuff. It was almost like it couldn't not happen. But all those things happened right in the 1920s.
There you go. It's like when you first discover there's a weed dealer. I don't know what that means. You have the stuff.
You mean at 14? Oh, wait.
Whatever that is. I don't know.
It's legal now in Minnesota.
I heard about it.
It's cool now. Yeah,
I've heard about it. I don't know what it means. But there you go. So for people that are listening, why is this important? How do we transpose this to today? What lessons can we learn, and how does this history really? We one of the sayings I have on the show from my quotes is, the one thing man can learn from his history is that man never learns from his history, and thereby we go round and around. So how do we apply what you've taught us here in the book? And we'll get into some stories here in a second. But why is this important? How can we utilize it for today's marketplace and business, et cetera, et cetera?
What I usually tell people is, you may not be that interested in the history of the 1920s, but the history of the 1920s is interested in you. And And here's the thing. We talked about, the mass production, mass finance, mass marketing. We talked about all those things, and we think about all those things as happening to us as consumers. But flip the language. We're getting tripped up on the word consumer. We think about mass consumption, that we're taking, that those things are happening to us. But what we really figured out how to do in the 1920s is become choice makers. Oh. That's the important decision. People get all hung up on consumerism and capitalism and all that stuff. That's all fine. You can have that discussion if you want. But what the 1920s taught Americans how to be is choice makers, how to make choices, not just with our products, but what podcasts they listen to, what sports they participate in, the family they decide to have, all of those things. Before the 1920s, how did you decide what family you wanted to have? Like, well, you went to church and the priest told you what kind of family you were going to have, and that's what you did. In the 1920s, once you kind of opened the Pandora's box of choices and choice making, people said, oh, you can buy this car, that car, that car. And people said, well, that means that I can read this newspaper, this newspaper, this newspaper. And they're like, ooh, yeah, we hoped you would just read all of them, but okay, guess you get to make choices there. And they said, well, wait a second. So I get to choose if I want to have kids or not. And they're like, oh man, damn it.
Damn it. I did
and
that.
So when we think about being a choice maker, I think the biggest thing I can tell people about when you finish reading this book, you'll understand that it's a lot more than just what products you could buy. It's learning how to think about all the choices you make in your life as, what if it had a price tag on it? What if you watched a video on YouTube about some new fitness thing and you thought, okay, do I want to do that or not? Okay, what if I wasn't just kind of learning about that from, like, hey, should I take this supplement or not? What if I thought about that in terms of, okay, it's got a price, not just the price tag for the supplement, but what do I have to do in my life? How much is that going to cost me in terms of time, time with my family, behaviors I'm going to have to do or not? How many times am I going to have to go to the gym? If you start thinking about making a consumer choice versus, reading a story in the New York Times, you're like, why do they want me to believe that? What if I had to buy that story? If I had to buy it, what else do I need to buy? You turn on your consumer instincts, because most people I know are very, very, very good at comparing products and figuring out what's right for them. But they don't take that same mindset into media. They don't take it into what they listen to, what they buy, all of that stuff. And I'm saying, after you finish this book, you will. You'll learn how to do it. It's really cool.
And that's really important. There's an old line from the band Rush, Neil Peart wrote, I believe, that said, we will pay the price, but we will not count the cost. And I remember that stuck in my head in the 90s. And I was like, yeah, people really don't consider the cost of stuff. I'll sit down with my friends who got divorced, and we'll sit down with their alimony and child support. And I'll be like, okay, so how much fun times did you have over 10 years? And then what was the cost of it? I'm like, wow, you could have just been partying in Vegas the whole time, every weekend, for what you paid. But there you go. You've got alimony and child support for the next 20 years. Have fun with that. And I think who's the Yellowstone star? He's going through that right now. The Kevin Costner. Yeah.
Oh, Costner. I thought you were going to say Harrison Ford, but that's 1923, isn't it?
That's true. There's a couple spinoffs now, isn't there?
Yeah, I lose track.
So can you give us a couple tease outs from the book? There's a lot of great brands that were built back then. I was going to say Anheuser-Busch. We had one of their people on recently talking about how the family was built. Coca-Cola. There's a lot of great brands that were built during this time, or probably finally hit pay dirt during this time. Can you tease out a couple stories or something that we can do?
Yeah, I think there are a couple that really jump out. I mean, obviously, this was the Babe Ruth era and kind of Wrigley Field. There's, the little black dress, became popular. So if you look at women wearing clothes today and you just kind of go to like a cocktail party, they could have been at that same cocktail party 100 years ago and they would have fit in. Because it's basically the same dresses, the same jewelry, the same fragrances, the same, all of that same stuff. But a couple of things that really strike close to home for most people. Most people don't know that frozen foods were invented in the 1920s, commercially available frozen foods.
Oh, wow.
And it's the inventor was Clarence Birdseye. So Birdseye frozen vegetables. They became more popular in the 30s. But the story is really cool. It's kind of the short version of the story is that he's a crazy, curious guy. And he ended up, through circumstance, up in Labrador, Canada with his wife. And he'd go out fishing with the Inuit anglers up there. They'd drill a hole in the ice. They'd auger it out. They'd take the fish out and they'd throw it onto the ice. And the fish, because it was about negative 40 degrees, the fish would freeze in like 3 seconds. Bam, frozen. Frozen hard, like hard frozen. Not like your freezer at home frozen. This is
Canada
Minnesota
frozen.
in the winter frozen.
Yeah, there you go.
So, and here's the thing. Have you ever frozen something from the fridge into the freezer and you heat it up the next day and it tastes like mush?
Yeah.
It just tastes terrible.
Yeah,
well, what Birdseye was one of the first people to figure out is the Inuits, when they reheated their fish, it's like, oh, well, this is really good. Why is it that frozen fish that was flash frozen like that tastes good, and the stuff I freeze in my freezer tastes like garbage? He was the
Inuits
first
had microwaves. Did I get it right?
Well, what he kind of figured out is that you need to freeze food and vegetables really, really fast because the water inside the cell walls will freeze. And when water freezes, it expands. When it expands, it bursts them. And that's what makes food taste like mush. When you freeze it fast, it doesn't give the water a lot of time to expand. That's the science lesson you probably learned in 10th grade. But here's the practical application is he figured out how to freeze it, not up in Labrador, Canada, but using chemicals in a factory. So basically mass producing frozen fish like Henry Ford mass produced cars, and was able to get all of that to market. And people could have frozen fish if they lived in Minnesota. They could have corn if they lived in Florida. They could have berries if they lived in Arizona. All of that stuff, that was all possible. And that was just not possible before the 1920s. It was that guy's singular invention and kind of bringing that to market that made it all happen. It's the first time we could choose to have food. We could choose what we wanted to eat.
And eat it year round, where it wasn't seasonal.
Eat it year round. Yeah. Like most people have no concept of what that's like. Like, hey, if strawberries are out of season, you are SOL.
Yeah.
But he was the first person who said, nah, I can fix that.
There you go. I mean, first kind of lay a foundation for globalization, because now we get vegetables year round from all over the world, That
whole idea, it's like, if you think about the long tail of impact there, that like we can get, I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and we don't got no lobsters here. I can promise you that, no matter how deep the lakes are. There are no lobsters outside of the tank, outside of those restaurants that we don't want to give their trademark on the show. But you've been to one, and you can pick the one you want dead up in the front. You say, kill that one for me. It's
like an executioner.
I know, it's a little weird.
I'm never going to be able to go into one now.
Oh, you will now, because you have to kill me that one.
Yeah, that's probably something sadistic that I have going on there.
But I can get lobster here. I can get fresh fish, fresh ocean fish from anywhere. And when I was down in Key West, they had corn. They had cornstarch. They had all those things. You can't grow corn in Key West. You can't grow much of anything in Key West. There isn't that much space there.
Just hurricanes.
Hurricanes, sugarcane, rum. There's a lot of rum in Key West.
And limes, evidently.
Yeah, key lime pie. Do have that if you're there. That is very.
Do they
very
grow
tasty.
the limes in key lime pie in Key West?
They're the little teeny ones. They do grow some there, but most of them are grown in South America now. Okay. Dirty little secret.
There you go. So these are great stories in helping people kind of realize how these things rose. And do you find that who's going to be targeted most of the book? Marketers, people who build brands and want lessons on how they go?
Yeah, here's the thing. There are a lot of those people that read my book, who will know me or have heard of me. And that's great. I I love writing for them, but I try to write for people who would not ordinarily pick up a history book. Most of the I know there are a lot of people who the thought of reading a history book just gives them hives, and they're like, you know what, I just want to read a mystery, I want to read a romance novel, whatever. I actually read and listen to a lot of mystery, science fiction, and romance novels because not only are they well written, but they're engaging in a way that most history is not. And it's just, I don't know what it is about kind of this. There is a version of historian that wants to kind of make sure that it's, every I is dotted, every T is crossed. And I love them. I couldn't do what I do without them. But it's very difficult for the lay person to kind of pick that up and get interested in it. You've got to be able to tell those stories that are interesting and fun in a way that a person who's used to reading romance novels would pick this up. So I market my books to people who don't read history. And so they're a really hard audience. I think that, people who are historians and marketing folks, they have their own, they either like some parts, they don't like others, whatever. But my hardest audience are the people who said, yeah, I read Nora Roberts, or I read, James Patterson, or I read Stephen King. Why would I pick up your book? I got to make my book something that they would pick it up and say, I want to read that. I'll give you a shot. So
does anybody say they read 50 Shades of Grey and read your books?
I will tell you, there are a couple of chapters in the book that do get a little naughty. We do talk about birth control in Boo's Babe in the Little Black Dress, and it is E for explicit, folks. I will tell you that it's just E for explicit. You are well warned.
Sounds like Saturdays when I go to Vegas and hit Spirit Reno. You have the nice sexy title, The Booze Babe in the Little Black Dress. People go, oh, yeah, that's interesting. And then you got the How Innovators, the Roaring 20s created the consumer revolution. So you got like the business and the sexiness there going on. Let's get a plug in for your other book that's really interesting, the one about the presidents. And I had that one up. Now I got to flip to it here. Marketer in Chief, how each president sold the American idea. Tell us a little bit about this book, because I think it's very interesting as well.
Yeah, I'm a big history buff, as you can guess. Most marketing.
We're starting to figure that out.
Yeah. You got that. You got that.
We're starting to get that. Yeah.
Yeah, there aren't a lot of historians in kind of my chosen field. We tend to kind of look forward. We're always trying to create the new thing, right? I mean, that's our job, is to create a new thing. We don't get a lot of points for creating old things. So there aren't a lot of people out there like me. So the one that's good in that I don't get a lot of competition, but it's bad that I don't have a lot of competition. I don't have other people I can look to. When I wrote Marketer in Chief, I wanted to get a sense for, I just wanted to explore how each president, not just like, hey, it's just Lincoln and Roosevelt and Barack Obama and George Washington. Like, no, I had to challenge myself to look at each president, because each president was kind of the chief marketing officer of the United States. And here's why I say that. When you think about the United States, let's compare that to China, for instance. What makes you a Chinese person? Well, like, okay, you live inside the border of China, or you were born there or something, and you are ethnically Han Chinese with a few other ethnicities kind of mixed in there. But if you are from China, you are Chinese. If you're American, what is that? America is not really a geography. Yeah, there's a United States area, but America is an idea. Yeah. It was the very first country that was really founded on kind of a set of ideas and ideals, more than just a geography that a people could defend. So the whole thought is, okay, it wasn't about kind of protecting the borders and kicking people out, kind of like European history, African history, Asian history, South American history. It was more like, how do you convince people that this is the place they wanted to be? Because most people weren't born into it. up front.
Yeah.
Everyone had to immigrate here. You
Yeah,
know,
the big
my
melting
parents immigrated here. They had to choose it. So I felt like I wanted to rethink the role of the president, not as like commander in chief, but as the person who is out there saying, America is really cool and you want to be a part of it. It's so cool. You want to immigrate here. It's so good. You don't want to be part of France anymore. You want to come here to do this, even though the food isn't going to be as good.
Yeah. Plus, we don't surrender either. So that's just that.
And we did bail them out of a couple big ones, didn't we?
France joke there. Yeah. They have that white flag as their flag thing, don't they? I'm just kidding. France, get over it. But yeah, the American idea and how it's being sold, and presidents, I guess, have sold this throughout all the different years. And you go through all 45 of them.
That's right. All from, I even had to hit Zachary Taylor. You got to hit Franklin Pierce.
Oh, Zachary Taylor, yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, like everybody, like, oh yes, of course.
That's a tough one to crack. I'm sure.
And most people kind of remember, like, oh, I remember the last 3-4 presidents, and the tricky part of the book was no one outside of historians are going to challenge my impressions of John Adams or, even Abraham Lincoln, those folks. If you kind of pick a story in there and you kind of talk about it, you don't get people emotional about it. Well, yeah. I also had to get a little closer to home, and you get to Carter, Reagan, Bush, Clinton. Is there another Bush? There was almost another Bush.
See, it seems like that. There was like 50.
There's always another
115 Roosevelts and like I think 5 or 6 Jacksons, Johnsons. Yeah, seems like there was everything. Yeah. There was only one Nixon, fortunately.
There was only one Nixon. Yeah, there's in more ways than one. There's only one.
Yeah, it's a good thing. Did he have kids? He did, didn't he? Yeah, he did. I think he did.
Yeah, it's funny. What do you do if there was an SNL skit I watched a while ago? It was like the change a name office. Your listeners can Google it. It is a good skit. I think Pete Davidson wrote the skit. It was all about kind of funny names. And there was a guy like whose great uncle was Adolf Hitler, and you think like, what do you do there? I just I don't know how you live with that, but
especially if you have that same mustache thing going on.
Yeah,
that he ruined that Hitler ruined that mustache for.
That was the Charlie Chaplin mustache. Yeah,
that's right, wasn't it?
Yeah, in the 20s, you saw a lot of guys. Like I looked at a lot of pictures of people in the 1920s because, I had to write that book. And there are a lot of people who had the Hitler. Like, you have no idea how popular that was. No idea. Like lots of people had it. So when people saw Hitler on German TV. It wasn't like, oh, that's the Hitler mustache. They're like, oh, why is that weirdo looking like Charlie Chaplin?
Yeah, which is ironic because then Charlie Chaplin did that whole great movie on him where it was kind of based on him, and a great bit. So how hard was it to go through and try and dig all this up? I mean, obviously with recent presidents, there's a lot of recorded data and press on them. Was it hard to get it from some of the more obscure presidents?
Oh yeah, there's no question. I think if I recall, there might have only been on some of the presidents, there might only be 1 or 2 biographies at all. There's the whitehouse.gov, they've got little histories and biographical sketches and a few references. You can find entire books on Abraham Lincoln's wife's recipes. Like there are whole books on that. But you look at the dude before him, Andrew Johnson, who was a piece of work. You look at that guy, and there might be 10 books total written about him. So there's definitely a sense for American history where we tend to pay attention to the winners. And the ones that, Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, Roosevelt, maybe we remember Roosevelt. There's another Roosevelt. But if you ask people to like, hey, can you name 5 presidents? No problem. Can you name 10? Okay. Yeah. Most people can. Name 20. Most people can't name 20. And part of that is because presidents generally, before FDR, really, before Lincoln for sure, before FDR, absolutely, the president wasn't that big of a deal. It was Congress that was the big deal, and that was on purpose. Most people haven't read this part of the Constitution. I know a lot of like real Constitution rah guys who have never actually read it. When you read the Constitution and it lays out the three branches of government, right? They'll say, you'd think, oh, well, president, Congress, and the courts. It's not how it is. The first is Congress, and it's like 3,000 words describing what they do. There's like 1,000 words describing what the president does. And there's like a footnote describing what the courts are supposed to do. So when you think about like, hey, it's, well, he could have written some more about that. And why hasn't
they could have maybe some rules and ethics regulations. But we're finding out now. And that's really interesting. So Congress was supposed to be almost maybe more important than the president. Maybe the president was supposed to be more of a figurehead.
Well, if you got to put yourself in the shoes of the people who were there at the time, they fought a war to not have a king.
That's true.
So that was kind of what was on their mind at the time. So they wanted more of a parliament, kind of congressional branch. The legislative branch was supposed to be primary. And under that, like, okay, we do understand the need for a figurehead, someone who is kind of head cheerleader and administrator. And then, we need courts. Courts are important, but they'll figure that out for themselves. They spent most of their time on Congress. So the big deals were who were in charge of the congressional committees. When you read history of that era and you think, oh, I'm going to read a biography of, Andrew Jackson. Well, Congress features really prominently during that. Just very much co-equal, if not much more important than the president.
There you go. Well, Clarence Thomas evidently figured out really well how to run SCOTUS and put it up for sale to any billionaire willing to buy. This is interesting. Is it kind of based around the framework of, in our Constitution, it says that we're I'm missing one of the words, but we're basically on a path to try and form a perfect union. And it's not claiming that we're perfect or that we might ever achieve it, but we're working towards that at all times. And that seems to be a theme through all of our history, and maybe always will be a theme. I remember when President Obama said, this is what we do. We're not a perfect union. We zig, we zag, we go back and forth, and somewhere over all this zigzagging over almost 250 years, we just try and get it right, or try and get it better. Righter, as it were. And sometimes we don't always do the right thing, and we can look back on history and go, maybe we made some mistakes there, or maybe a lot of mistakes actually when you look at the history of this country. But maybe we're better. But you're right. Every president tries to sell what the American dream ideal should be. We've had that great Statue of Liberty standing out there in the ocean that seemed to convey a lot of that imagery or that idealism. Was that kind of something that a lot of people picked up on and ran with for, ever since that thing came over from France?
Yeah, there's always been a sense of, kind of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
There you go.
That it's really the key word in all that's pursuit. People think it's it's life, it's liberty, it's happiness. Like, no, it's the pursuit. It's the journey. And, that's really what the framers figured out, and what the genius really wasn't any of the specifics that were in there. It was that we have to have something that can change over time. What's the right balance? You change too quickly and things fall apart. You change too slowly and things kind of calcify. So it's kind of getting the right balance, and you never get it perfect. But over time, if you leave flexibility, that you've got a kind of a pursuit of something, a more perfect union, and the realization that you'll never get there.
There you go.
that part is important for people to understand. As frustrating as things can get, that, it's been frustrating before. It's looked bad before, and just, I think that's the big reason, and Chris, I think that people should take in more history, is that it'll actually make them a lot more hopeful for the future. Because if you read history of what it was like, not in 1929 when the stock market crashed, but around 1933, when people finally kind of got the memo that this is going to suck, and it's going to suck for a long time. And you think about someone who is escaping the Oklahoma or the Kansas plains because all the topsoil blew off.
The old Dust Bowl.
The Dust Bowl. And you had you had to basically walk to California. It makes sometimes kind of the problems we have today seem a little bit more manageable.
It definitely does. You give me epiphany when you were talking about how the ideals there. One thing that's interesting is that's been our biggest sell as a democracy, is that forming that perfect union and trying to always strive towards it. And I think the key word is probably freedom in there. Having the freedom to be able to do that, because that's what we've always sold. That's been the brand that we've sold. And that's why people around the world have always wanted to come to this country. People really bash immigration, but especially on Fox News. But when you really think about it, and the people are willing to give their lives to come here. You really think about the people that when you and I probably grew up, or at least when I grew up, there was the wall at the USSR.
Oh, you bet. I was there. Yep.
Yeah, the people gave their lives to try to get to freedom. That freedom was so important, and that potential, or the chance of the potential, and the need. When I grew up looking at the USSR and communism, and I look at America, it really was not just two different political ideals. It was a human ideal. It was the ideal of the human spirit, the human drive, the human vision, the human ability to be limitless, or have the potential to be limitless, where, the other one was kind of the destruction or the killing or the regulation of the human spirit, and a guarantee of, you'll get fed today and you guaranteed jobs and stuff like that. But yeah, you better sit down, shut up, and not cause any problems. And you just see the difference of it, and really that's, as you mentioned, what people need to learn to love and appreciate about this country. As an entrepreneur, that's what I've always loved about this country, the ability for just about anybody. You see people that can come here and they can be an immigrant even today, and they can come out the latest, hottest thing, the greatest thing. They can be poor and become rich. We seem to be more rugged individualism than anything. And certainly, some of the economic things we've had that have put stress on the middle America, and it seems to be a little bit harder to achieve the American dream these days. But still, the potential is there, and that's the beauty of it. That's why people from all over the world want to come here. That, and we have Big Macs, so there's that.
Oh yeah, McDonald's. That's people like KFC is the big thing people love outside of here. It's a weird thing. I just look at it this way, as someone who's into product development, you think about people lined up outside the app, an Apple store when a new iPhone comes out, an iPhone, the first one or the first couple, there are just lines out the door, like the Nintendo products or, whatever the case may be. That's a way to kind of think about the United States. Like there are a lot of things to criticize about the United States. And in the book, Marketer in Chief, there's plenty of that to go around. But what you'd always come away with, though, is, hey, even though that iPhone's not perfect, that Nintendo's not perfect, that Taylor Swift concert might not be the best concert ever, but there's people lined up down the block to get in. That tells you something. As a marketing person, as someone in product development, people are voting with their feet. Yeah. And if you ever doubt that, you're like, well, immigration, this and that. Like, okay, stop for a second. Just, every 4 years, every two, really, you've got an Olympic Games. Look at all the Olympics. Like, okay, you see the Chinese national team. Who's on the Chinese national team? Chinese people. You know, you go to the Japanese team. Who's on the Japanese team? Japanese people. You know, you go to most countries in the world, all of the people are kind of ethnically similar. What's the only exception to that? You go to the United States, and you've got people from all over the world who have chosen to be part of the United States.
Sometimes we steal people from other people's Olympic
sometimes,
teams.
we get them to defect. That happened a lot more when we were kids than it does now.
Yeah, that's true. And that just speaks to the beauty of American dream, and what more people need to recognize is that's one of our beauties, the melting pot. I mean, we've got so many CEOs now. I mean, the CEO of Google and in different countries, Steve Jobs' parents were immigrants. Immigration is one of the greatest things for us, especially now as we're starting to compete with larger marketplaces of consumers that far outnumber us, and we're starting to see the damage of dwindling populations. You know, India looks like it's probably going to rise as China falters because of its one-child policy as an economy. It was destined to be the largest economy by 2025 over the last 10 or 15 years. That's been rummaging around, if not 20 years. And that looks like it's faltering, partially because they're going to go through what Japan's going through with this degentrification. Is that the right word? And we're kind of in the same boat where we're starting to slow down, where India is, they're just warming up over there, baby. And they may be the largest market ever. I mean, that people don't realize how much us having the power of the dollar and most of the goods in the world are processed through the dollar is kind of our lasting grace. It used to be mortgages too, but we blew that one. So give us your final thoughts as we go out, final pitch on your books and all that good stuff.
I think the biggest thing that will give people, because there's a lot of anxiety right now, Chris. You know, people are worried about climate, they're worried about the economy, they're worried about politics, and I talk with a lot of people about that, and I say, you know what? The more history you read, the more hopeful you are. So if you want to kind of give yourself a little emotional boost, read Marketer in Chief, read Boo's Babe in the Little Black Dress, read other great history books that people will recommend to you, because when you see how people in the past faced circumstances much tougher than the ones we're facing now, and they overcame them, you'll get that inspiration, that kind of feeling that says, I can do this. We can do this. This will be okay. There are problems. Absolutely. But we figured out a way to get through them before. We're all still here. That's cool. It makes you feel not like, hey, that you're ignoring all this stuff. No, it makes you want to face the problems and get over them. And rather than being fatalistic, I read, Chris, that, I can't remember what the percentage of Gen Z felt like, that the world would end within 50 years from kind of climate annihilation, that within 50 years, every human in the world would be dead. It was a shockingly large number of people. And I don't know if that's true or not. Maybe it is, and we all got 50 years left. I somehow doubt it, but I think when I take a look at that and I think, okay, there's an entire generation of people who don't have that kind of hope and optimism that comes from, we are not descended. What was the old quote? It was a Brit who said this. We are not descendant from, kind of weak-minded people. We are descended from tough people. We can get through this. Read history. Give yourself a little shot in the arm. That's the best thing I can tell you.
There you go. We're Americans, damn it. This is what we do. And, maybe we need to get back to that. Realize we're all Americans. This is one of the things that I do when I go into any sort of politics or discussion that come up. I usually lay a foundation. I go, we're going to make a clear point here. We're all Americans. And I don't give a fuck about your party. I don't give a fuck about what your politics are. We're Americans first, and we're brothers and sisters here. And now, if you want to talk about some political ideas, we can talk about that. But I want everyone to remember, we're Americans first. and that's more important than parties and everything else. And it's kind of interesting how when you frame it that way and set that foundation, the conversation changes a little bit. Because then
it gets better, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Because when people lead with parties, like, who are you? I'm a GOP. I'm a Democrat. Then you're already lost in the discussion because everyone's got their thing. Especially now where people are so segmented. And I think your book, what we've talked about, highlights that. Where we need to get back to going, we're Americans first. Damn it, the Constitution is important. You kind of highlighted one of my big annoyances is just use anybody who usually is running around mouthing the Constitution says has never read it and usually can't read either. Actually, I think it's like 50. I think I saw a statistic. Someone said 54% of people read at a 4th grade level in this country or something. And then there's my favorite ad is George Carlin's thing. Think how dumb the average person is and realize 50% of the people are
dumber than that.
Yeah. So
God bless George Carlin.
Yeah, I mean, if you, I was talking with somebody the other day, and they're like, 30% of this country supports some batshit stuff, and I'm like, if you study history, 30% of this country has always supported batshit stuff.
Oh yeah,
like,
you'll see, especially back in the 20s. I cover some of those things as like sidebars. People believed some weird stuff, and like you thought, oh well, there was no one like. Insert your bugaboo here. Like, oh man, that dude's nothing compared to this guy. It's so hopeful to read that. You're like, oh, this isn't so bad. We got this. It gives you perspective. Yeah, for sure.
I mean, 30% of this country, even after listening to Nixon with the tapes and everything, the smoking gun tapes and everything, 30% of this country were still behind him after he resigned. And they went through that whole kerfuffle. There's a portion of this country has always been trailer park and probably always will be. And I don't know if that's okay or not, but as long as it's kind of like if you really study too, the moderates in this country, the people in the middle, who aren't on the extremes of both parties, they're actually the ones who really shape things because no one can win a presidency without them.
Yeah. And, over time, you find that they do. That people feel like, oh, it's extremes on either side that tend to push things, and they have an influence. There's no question that they can be loud, they can be noisy. But if you kind of look, the reality is 70% of all economic activity in the United States is driven by individual consumer choices. Mm-hmm. It's such a powerful fact that. If the average American doesn't want to buy that, doesn't want to sign up for that, they won't. That it's just as simple as that. And no matter what policy you've got, if it's not in tune with what the mainstream is and they quit buying your product, you're done. They quit buying your political ideal, it stops getting clicks on YouTube or Twitter, you're done. And that's a wonderful corrective mechanism that people can make their own choices. And that's what I deeply believe in. Like, people make their own choices, and they will make the right ones eventually. Not all the time, but it's okay. Eventually they will make the right calls, given enough time.
And then the great thing about our democracy is, we have the ability to readjust and reset and go, but those 4 years probably weren't the best idea.
Didn't work.
We were probably a little drunk with something or power or whatever. I don't know what was going on then, but we're off the juice, and we're gonna try something else, or maybe we're gonna try to go back to normal. So, and then hopefully we don't zigzag some more. It's been wonderful having the show, Jason. Very thoughtful and exciting to read both your books because I love history. The one thing man can learn from his history is that man never learns from his history, and everybody we just go around and around, we just repeat everything just to make sure we didn't. What's that old joke that sometimes I hear the chicks on TikTok say? Sometimes I just keep doing the thing I shouldn't do over and over again, just to make sure that it was the wrong thing not to do. Just to make sure. Something like that. There's something they say about that. I love it. So, Jason, give us your .coms wherever we want people to find you on the interwebs.
Yeah, people can best find me at jasontvoyevich.com. That's my personal website. You can also look me up on LinkedIn or Amazon.
There you go. Thank you for coming on the show. We really appreciate it, man.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
There you go. And thanks, Madison, for tuning in. Order the book where our fine books are sold. It came out March 24th, 2023. Booze, Babe, and the Little Black Dress, How Innovators of the Roaring 20s Created the Consumer Revolution. Thanks, Madison, for tuning in. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, youtube.com/Chris Voss, linkedin.com/Chris Voss, and TikTok at Chris Voss1. Thanks for being here. Be good to each other. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.